Hello, welcome back. This is Jeff Byers. This is Andy255, and this is kind of an update on Maya 2022, which we're seeing has more and more bugs, which isn't helpful, but it just makes it makes for a frustrating situation. So I'm trying to keep up on these things as best I can, and I have no idea. I've done these simulations in 2020, and they work fine. So there are just a couple things. Otherwise, it's working pretty well. I'll just talk about more things, some of the issues that some of you guys are having that may be the problem. And the first thing I want to mention that a lot of people don't think about is modeling has everything to do with dynamic simulation. So if you have a poor model geometry, it will not work properly with dynamics. So if you have an object that just has one side, the dynamics won't work with it. It needs to have thickness, okay, like a real object has thickness, okay? I go through modeling a picture and I'm modeling a glass. The thing I probably shouldn't have had you guys do is go out and look for stuff yourself. I probably should have never put that in, and now that I know this has become more of an issue, I'm going to have, I would suggest that if you are having issues with things bouncing all over the place or things going through an object, a couple things you need to look at is the geometry. Is it built properly? Does it accurately resemble a real object? Okay. So if anything, I tend to make things just a little thicker, just a little, so the collisions don't go through. Okay. So if you have issues like collisions going through or bouncing all over the place, a lot of the issues are that the faces, the geometry is facing the wrong way. Okay. So when you model something, what happens is that you have two sides of the model. Okay. One is the side that the faces are, because this is just if I take the top off, the cylinder is no longer has a density. Okay, the minute I take that off, because I can see the other side. Okay, so this becomes a single wall, a single face. Okay, this object has double faces, faces on the inside and faces on the outside, and I've got thickness all around. Okay, now if I take faces off the top, then I can see all the way through. Okay, so the way particles see this is that it doesn't even exist. Okay, I'm using this as a shelf for to fill, to add particles to this. But if I'm going to have particles collide with things, they have to have thickness. As you can see, that's one of the biggest issues that you're going to find. That's a problem. It has to be closed. The object also has to be closed. This object is closed. Okay, right? Even though there's a hole in this object here, it is closed. That object is closed. It has no holes anywhere. Okay, right? This object is not closed, and so particles will not collide with this effectively or efficiently. Okay, so that's the first issue you're going to have is your geometry. Okay, so if your geometry you got from somewhere else, you're not controlling that geometry. You're bringing it in. You're hoping and praying that that'll work with the particles. Okay, I have no control over what you're bringing in. Okay, to have control over what you want to use in your particle simulation is going to start with modeling. So you're going to have to probably model this picture, and you're going to probably model the glass. Now I have a video on that, how to get you started. Okay, and you guys know how to model, so I think you're good to go. All right. So the next thing we've got to do is we have to make sure everything in the scene is clean. Okay, what I mean by clean is that we go through here and we make sure that we have delete by type history and freeze transformations. So we're going to delete the history here. We're in the poly modeling tab of the shelf, and then we're going to freeze transformations. Okay, that's the first thing you're going to do. Second thing you're going to do is one by one, you're going to add a collision. Okay, so to do that, you're going to have to go to not fields and solvers. Okay, you're going to go to nCloth. Okay, and you're going to go to passive collider. Okay, and you're going to do that for all these objects. nCloth, passive collider, and nCloth, passive collider. So Now our scene's all set up. And you can see here, open your outliner by going to Windows Outliner, and that should open up somewhere. You have your objects in your scene, okay? And then you have your rigid bodies, okay? This controls the bounciness, the friction, and the stickiness. So you can see that. If this didn't pop up, then do a Control A, and it should pop up your attribute editor for all of these, okay? So the nRigid just means that it's a dynamic passive collider, basically a collision. And this is how you can control it. Collision strength and the thickness of the collision. And these are things you can look at too. So if you want to see what the table collision looks like, you can turn that on, collision thickness, okay? And you can make those changes here with the collision thickness. You can make it smaller. It needs to be big enough to envelop it, the whole thing, okay? So the default usually is pretty good, okay? Anything smaller, it could be a problem, all right? Just keep it, keep that in mind. All right, so I'm not sure what that was. But anyway, so I'm going to go in here and make it a little bit smaller. I think it was like 0.036. I think. Okay, I'll turn that off. That gets in the way. So that's how you can see. And bounciness, of course, you don't want that on because you don't want water bouncing all over the place. Friction, if you find the water is bouncing all over too much, then you can turn the friction up a little bit or down a little bit if needed. Stickiness. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is, now that we got that far, is you're going to need to fill this container up with nParticles. So to do that, we're going to click on the cylinder and go to nParticles and fill object. Okay. Now this will be set up at 50. Okay. So I'm going to go to 25. Okay, and see where what that gives me. Okay. And I'm going to do a particle fill. All right, so there we go. And so it's not tightly packed. I believe I went to 100 on the video before, and for some of you that's going to be way too much. And if I can look at this, and they're kind of spaced apart a little bit too much. So I'm going to go Control Z back if I can. It may not let me. No, it won't let me. So make sure you save your work before you continue. I've already saved my scene. Whenever you do particles, you always want to save your scene before you do that. And I should have reminded you before I did this. I know. But I'm going to work with this, okay? Because some of you don't have graphics cards that can handle, and that's a big thing here. Is it's based on what your computer can handle, okay? Now I think this is going to be enough particles, okay? So we'll see what happens. And we'll go with less, and then we can turn the resolution up a little bit higher as we go along if we need to, okay? All right, so let's try that first. So the first thing I'm going to do is I just want to see the particles. I don't want to see that cylinder. So I'm going to go Control A to get into layer editor. And I'm going to add this to a layer and just turn that off for now. I'll probably call that cylinder and save that. All right, so now we got to click on the nParticles over here on the outliner. So those are set up. I'm going to go Control A to set up the nParticle shape. You're going to be working with that now. All right, so so we have the count. Okay, that's a lot less than I have in the other video, and we might have some issues with that. So really, we want a good count would be around 5,000 to 6,000. Okay. Before if I had 100, I had like 111,000. So right now, this will work with this. If it's not enough, you'll have to go back and go through this process again with the cylinder. That's why I save it before I do and cylinders are easy to create, guys. Just click on the cylinder up there, scale it, take the top off, and you're good to go. So lifespan, we want to keep it for live forever. Particle size. Notice that if I mess with that like I did in the other video. This is the bug that I see. So the issue is that it's not showing your radius. Okay, so the workaround for that is in collision. Okay, under collisions. So we want to do a couple things here. We want to click on self collide and solver to have show thickness, and I'm going to turn that on to, let's say, oh, I don't know, to a blue. Okay, now you can see that there are not very many particles here, which could cause kind of a problem later on, making it look goopier than it is. Really, you can get some pretty realistic fluid results if your computer can handle it. That's the key. So right now, there's not much we can do here, but that will solve your problem of seeing these objects. So you can go up here to the radius now, and it will work. Okay. All right. So you can see how that's working there. Okay. So I'm going to keep it, a little bit larger so we can see it in the collision. And the thing is now, the particle size in the collision event will be a little bit different now. Because I'm going to bring it down to like 110. And you can see the huge space in there. Okay, which is fine, but we have collision on, so that will help. Okay, we may not have enough with this many particles. We may not have enough to fill up the glass, so just keep that in mind. You may need to go higher than 25. I should have started with 50, and that's probably what you should do. Okay, for now, that's about it. That's all we can do. So now let's go ahead and do our simulation. So the first couple things we're going to do is we just want it to play once. So right now, at the very right hand bottom of the menu, we can see this playback. Okay, so it's going to play once, and that's all we want. And I need to set up my time slider to go to 600. Just type that in, and then playback. We don't want it to play every frame. We want it to play 24 times 1. Okay, and then click on save. There we go. And then we can play the animation simulation, and there we go. Okay, so, and I think that'll be enough to fill up the glass. So I'm going to stop that. All right, so there we go. So it worked, and it worked pretty fast. I've got a 2080 RTX Ti, and so yours might be a little bit slower, and that's okay. All right, so that's my simulation. If you have anything different, then you might want to watch this video again and make sure that your geometry is good. You don't have too many of these. I wouldn't go any more than 50. Some of you can handle more, and some of you can't. If you have an RTX card, you could probably handle pretty much anything. But I'm just showing you something that's a little less, as I just a little fewer nParticles. So, all right. With that said, so we're getting a simulation. That's good. And everything's staying in there. I don't see anything coming out the bottom, so we're good to go. And one of the things that some students ask me, what happens when you bring it up, the radius up a little bit more? What happens to that simulation? Let's take a look. So if you have it too high, let's go back to simulate, click off, and then go back to the start. Now, if you scrub this, particles go everywhere, and you might crash your system. So don't scrub. You always want to play this way. And you can see that the particles, that's awesome. I didn't even know you could do that, but that was pretty cool. I don't want that, obviously. So what happens is that if your particles are too big, okay, especially when you have our collision on self-collide, what's happening is they're self-colliding and then they're exploding away from each other, which is kind of a cool effect, right? It's very cool, but it's not what we want. So we don't want an explosion. So let's go back to click off and then go to particle. And it's probably going to give you a warning like interpenetration and all that stuff. So let's bring that radius down to where they're not touching each other. Okay. So 0.111 was fine. Okay, we got enough space, and that will work. Okay. So something like that, or 1.3, or 1.5, or something like that. There we go, something like that. So we can see them, but they're not interacting with each other already. All right, so let's see what happens, and I'm sure it'll be fine this time. There we go. Cool. All right, so nothing's falling out. That's great. If you have stuff falling out, it's probably because you don't have any thickness, or you have some normals reversed in your scene. And if that happens, then you can just click on those faces, and you can go to your mesh display and go to reverse. That's how you can reverse your normals. Okay.